Genesis 47. Let's just begin reading here and we'll get going and we'll fill in what we need to fill in as we go through it. Genesis 47 verse 1. Then Joseph went and told Pharaoh and said, "My father and my brothers, their flocks and their herds, and all that they possess have come from the land of Canaan. And indeed, they are in the land of Goshen." Now, if you look at a Bible map, you'll see that Goshen is, or at least where Goshen used to be, is very far up north, up against the Mediterranean Sea. And that was literally the only route in to Egypt proper, that main body of land there in Egypt. You had the Sinai Peninsula, which was part of Egypt, and then you have that Suez Canal that comes up and disconnects the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt proper, the main body of land there in Egypt. So because that canal comes up so far, almost to the peak there where the Mediterranean Sea is, because of that, if you're coming into Egypt proper, this is where you go through. You go through Goshen, that city of Egypt that's sitting very high up near the mouth of the Nile River. And that's where they've come to in this journey. His brothers and fathers have come into Goshen. They're at the very top of that main body of Egypt. And that's where we finished off last week in Genesis 46. Joseph, excited to see his family, rushes out there to Goshen and meets his family there. And now we see what Joseph is planning. What he's planning to do is he's planning to leave his family there, have his family stay put, and he's going to bring 5 representatives from his family. I suppose he's picking out his favorite 5 brothers there. I'm guessing Simeon wouldn't be on that list. There's a couple that might not make his cut, but I think he picked the 5 best representatives of the family. He's going to take them down to Pharaoh, and the reason why is because Joseph has Pharaoh's unofficial word that the family of Joseph can move right there into the land of Goshen and stay there. Remember, Joseph already promised that land to his family before he ever got the approval of the Pharaoh, but then he did get the approval of the Pharaoh. He gave his initial word. And what Joseph wants to do here is get Pharaoh's final authoritative word that his family can stay there in Goshen. And I think this is a very wise strategy. He says to his family, "You guys stay put. I'm going to go down. I'm going to talk to Pharaoh. I'm going to take 5 representatives from the family. And I'm going to tell the Pharaoh, hey, my family arrived. They're up in Goshen," which wouldn't be suspicious because that was the only way in. And they're tired from their journey. They're hanging out in Goshen. Would you like me to bring them all down to see you? And I think Joseph is hoping that the Pharaoh will go, "No, that's okay. I understand they're tired from the journey. And I promised them the land of Goshen anyway. They can just go ahead, settle down, and stay put." So verse 2, he took 5 men from among his brothers and presented them to Pharaoh. Then Pharaoh said to his brothers, "What is your occupation?" And they said to Pharaoh, "Your servants are shepherds, both we and also our fathers." So they followed Joseph's counsel from Genesis 46 to a T, didn't they? Joseph knew that the Egyptians loathed shepherds. It was an abomination to them. The Egyptian culture actually used to be a culture that had many, many shepherds in them. That was under that last dynasty, but things have changed. They're in a new dynasty now. And I don't know if it's religious or if it's just the principle of the thing, but they hate shepherds. Joseph, knowing that, told his family last week in Genesis 46 to be upfront about what you do for a living. Remember that? Be upfront about who you are. Tell Pharaoh right up front that you're a shepherd because that's actually going to help you. The Egyptians can't stand shepherds, so they're going to leave you alone. And we talked last week about how that's a really good thing for us too. That's a good principle. Don't hide your Christianity. Just be upfront about who you are in Christ. Those that are fine with it, or open to it, then they're going to be drawn to you because of Christ in you. Those that are opposed to Christ, because we know that's where it starts, right? The world doesn't reject us or hate us without a cause. They first hate Christ, and because they hate Christ, then they hate Christians. And so that's just a great principle. If someone is just naturally predisposed to reject Christ, you still be upfront about your Christianity, and that's going to save you a lot of trouble. Those people that are drawn to you, wonderful. Those people that are repelled by you, hey, that's fine too. You just know where you stand. Where you get into trouble is where you become too good of friends with the world, and then you get in those compromising situations. So we said last week that being upfront about your Christianity is actually a good way to assist the Lord in the sanctifying process in your life. So your first day on that new job, you just show up and you say, "Hi, I'm Arlyn and I'm a Christian. Teach me my job." That's it, done. First day at school, kids, same thing. All your classes walk in, raise your hand. "My name is Arlyn and I'm a Christian." Now maybe don't be that overboard with it, but you get the idea, right? It keeps you from worldliness, and it keeps worldliness from you. It's a great principle. So now, verse 4, they said to Pharaoh, "We have come to dwell in the land because your servants have no pasture for their flocks. For the famine is severe in the land of Canaan. Now therefore, please let your servants dwell in the land of Goshen." Then Pharaoh spoke to Joseph, saying, "Your father and your brothers have come to you." They finally made it. That's wonderful. Verse 6, "The land of Egypt is before you. Have your father and brothers dwell in the best of the land, and let them dwell in the land of Goshen. And if you know any competent men among them," in other words, if any of your brothers are really gifted in this field of work, taking care of livestock, then Pharaoh says, "Make them chief herdsmen over my livestock." So here we have it. Pharaoh has given his official and final approval that Goshen, the best part, the best piece of land in Egypt, Goshen, was dedicated to Joseph's family. And they got a promotion here too, didn't they? Now, I don't know how much livestock Pharaoh had. I don't know how much livestock the Egyptian government owned, but keep tracking with me in this study, because before this chapter is through, you're going to see Pharaoh ends up owning all of the livestock in all of Egypt. So this little promotion maybe right now, taking care of a couple personal herds of Pharaoh, well, business is going to be booming real quick by the end of this chapter. Verse 7. Then, so this would be a good while later, after the family is all settled there in Goshen. Then Joseph brought in his father Jacob and set him before Pharaoh. Watch this. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh. That was an extremely bold move by Jacob. And right now, Joseph is probably thinking, "Oh, Dad, what are you doing? You're embarrassing me. That's not how this works, Dad. You just don't show up all tired and tattered and bless the Pharaoh." You see, there's always been accepted rules on how this whole pronouncing blessing over another person works. It was true for all of these civilizations, not just Jews. I mean, this was true for all of these civilizations. Egypt, Israel, didn't matter. It all worked the same. Those accepted rules for pronouncing blessing over a person were actually still intact in the first century AD as Paul, I believe, pens the book of Hebrews. And right there in Hebrews chapter 7, verse 7, we see one of those rules pertaining to one person pronouncing a blessing on another person. Here's what Paul says. This is a standard rule in pronouncing blessing. Hebrews 7:7. It says this: "Now beyond all contradiction," that means no one has any ground to stand on to argue against this. "Beyond all contradiction, the lesser is blessed by the better." That's one of the rules. Pronouncing blessings, here's how it works. The lesser is blessed by the greater. The greater is never blessed by the lesser. So now you see what kind of statement Jacob shows up into Pharaoh's courts to make. Here comes Jacob, poor. That's why they're in Egypt. He's poor right now. He's hungry. There's no food back home. Technically, he was homeless just a few minutes ago. He's poor. He's hungry. He's homeless. He's up there in age. And there he is throwing his hand on the Pharaoh and pronouncing a blessing over the Pharaoh. And it's not that he's saying, me, Jacob, I'm blessing you, Pharaoh, because I am more of a man than you. I'm a better person. I'm a greater man. That's not the statement that Jacob is making. The statement would be this: Pharaoh, I'm blessing you. I'm pronouncing a blessing over you because I have something that you don't. I have the blessing of God on my life. You don't have the blessing of Yahweh on your life. I have the blessing of Yahweh on my life. And as a believer in Christ, that same privilege is ours. The scripture calls us a royal priesthood. That means you can do priestly work, church. You don't have to be approved by Anchored Fellowship to do priestly kind of service in the kingdom. We're a royal priesthood. We're a holy nation. We are a blessed people that God has given the right and power to take that blessing with us wherever we go and infuse it into every relationship, infuse it into every encounter with every person, infuse it into every situation that we find ourselves in. So that's your right and privilege as a Christian. Be a blessing wherever you go. Now, it is true, they say, some people, some Christians are a blessing wherever they go. But it's also true that some Christians are a blessing whenever they go. Some Christians bring joy by just entering the room, and some Christians bring joy by just exiting the room. Don't be the latter in either one of those. You be that Christian that you just showing up, the glory on your countenance, the spirit that is in you, you just showing up blesses the situation. You want to be one of those people where people say, all right, here comes Arlyn again. That guy is such a blessing. I just love that guy. Whenever I'm around him, my mood lifts. You don't want it to be, oh, geez, here comes Arlyn. Oh, man, he always drags me down. Verse 8, Pharaoh said to Jacob, how old are you? I like that. That's his response. Jacob has just laid his hand on Pharaoh. Keep in mind, Pharaoh, the most powerful man in the world at this time. The rest of the world is famine-stricken. And there Pharaoh sits as the ruler of Egypt, the only country that has storehouses chock full with grain, food. The most powerful man in the world, and Jacob has just laid his hand on Pharaoh and blessed him in the name of the Lord. And here's Pharaoh's response. How old are you? Poor, hungry, homeless. And dude, how old are you that you're blessed? That's not how this works. I'm the Pharaoh. I bless people because the greater blesses the lesser. I bless people, but no, Jacob had it right. Jacob had it right. The greater was blessing the lesser because Jacob knew his God. Verse 9, and Jacob said to Pharaoh, the days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. 130 years. He's 130 years old. Now, there are a lot of metaphors that we could use to describe life. Some call life an adventure. Some call life a puzzle. Some call life a race. Some call life a fight, a struggle. I love the metaphor that Jacob has used. He calls his life a journey. He calls his life a pilgrimage with God. And that tells me that Jacob gets it. Jacob understands that high call that is on his family. It all started with his grandfather, Abraham, who was minding his own business in Ur of the Chaldees. Remember the the city that invented the hot tub. We said it was Hot Tub City. You know, it was nice there. You don't leave that place. But God called Abraham to leave that city and begin a sojourning, a pilgrimage, traveling, journeying with the Lord. And he called Abraham and the entire family to be just that, sojourners, dwellers of tents. They were supposed to live in tents so that when the Lord spoke to them and said, move, that they could just pack up and head out. And Abraham lived his life that way. And Isaac lived his life that way. And now we get to Jacob, and we know by reading through the story of Jacob already that he has lived his life in the very same way. He has lived his life as a journeyer. He has lived his life as a man that was on a pilgrimage with God. And it is the same case with all three of them. They understood that God had a much bigger purpose and promise for their life than anything that they could find or experience on this earth. And we talked about a couple times, Hebrews chapter 11, verse 10. Here's what this family was looking for. Here's why they were okay with being pilgrims in the land and not settling in and being permanent residents. Here's how they could be okay with being pilgrims. Hebrews 11:10. They were looking for this. The city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. And apparently Jacob was journeying right along in his grandfather's footsteps. And you know the Christian life is the same way. It's still a great metaphor for us, because that's exactly how the Lord wants us to live our lives. And when we do, when we live our lives as pilgrims, it helps us to take things a whole lot less seriously that we should be taking a whole lot less seriously. Is when stuff falls apart all around us, when our Chevy breaks down, whatever it might be, we know, hey, this is just earthly stuff. This is just temporary. Colossians 3:2. Set your mind on things above, not on things of the earth. 1 Corinthians 7:31, Paul says, use this world. You got to live here. Use this world, but don't misuse it or abuse it. Just use it to get through. And then the Apostle Paul says, because the form of this world is passing away. In other words, don't get too attached. This stuff's all going to melt away. The scripture predicts that. This world is going to pass away with a fervent heat at the very end. And all that stuff you love so much and counted on so much and depended on so much, it just all melts away. So the Christian is to be a pilgrim too. We're to be journeying through. Like that old song, this world is not my home, just a passing through. My treasures are laid up somewhere beyond the blue. Jacob says, I'm a traveler. That's what I am. That's what my life's been, traveling. And I'm 130 years old. Think about it. I've been traveling for 130 years. You guys thought the drive to Pittsburgh was bad. 130 years I've been on this journey, traveling with the Lord from spot to spot. And he says this, few and evil have been the days of the years of my life. How real is that? Jacob says, life has been way too short and extremely tough. My life has been too short and too tough. That's just being real, you know. That's one of those guttural answers. That's not one of the typical expected answers. You know, hi, how are you doing? Hi, how are you doing? And then the person is expected to say, oh, I'm doing good. I'm doing fine. Now, this is a guttural answer. This comes from deep down. This comes from a life of pain from Jacob. That, hey, things have been difficult and my days have been few. Does that kind of strike you? My days have been few. He's 130 years old. He's lived approximately, based on a 360-day-a-year calendar, because they're Jews, he's had approximately 46,800 days. And he says, my days have been few. But yet you kind of get it, don't you? I know it sounds ridiculous at first. I'm only 130 years old. My days have been few. But don't you kind of get it? Because the older you get, the more you realize life is short. And the older you get, life seems shorter. Your days go quicker. The younger people have no idea what we're talking about. Life still seems to be going slow for them. But we've reached the point where we can read this and go, oh yeah, I get it. I get it. His days have been few. Life seems really short. James says in James chapter 4, verse 14, for what is your life? It is even a vapor, just a puff of smoke, puff of steam. It's a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes away. And I think Jacob has another reason to feel as though his days have been few, and that would be comparison. And that's what we see in the next part of this verse. Reading on, it says, speaking of the days of the years of his life, he says, they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their pilgrimage. And that's true. Abraham and Isaac, Terah, for that matter, they greatly outlived Jacob at this point, who is only 130. So comparatively, his days have been few. Either way, it's a condition that we could all find ourselves in one day if we're not careful, looking back in regret over the wasted time of our lives. Now, I know it's good to take some days to veg out and relax, but do keep in mind, one day you're going to look back over the span of your life like Jacob, and you're going to either say, man, my days were full. They were about as full as I could physically handle. Or you're going to look back and you're going to say, man, I squandered this precious gift of life that the Lord gave me. I squandered it. So we keep that in mind as we move on. Verse 10. So Jacob blessed Pharaoh again. He gives him an entry blessing and an exit blessing. And went out from before Pharaoh. Verse 11. And Joseph situated his father and his brothers and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramses. Now that's the same as Goshen. Just keep in mind, Moses is writing this. And at the time that Moses wrote this, that land of Goshen was then known as the land of Ramses. So to Joseph, this is the land of Goshen. But to Moses, in the future, it would be the land of Ramses. Verse 12, then Joseph provided his father, his brothers, and all his families, all his father's household with bread, according to the number in their families. Take special note of that, because what we're going to see after this and how this famine affects the Egyptians, just keep this in mind. Joseph's family is in a different category. His family is provided for by Joseph, by the Egyptian government. So they're not going to experience the same stuff that the Egyptian common person is going to experience here as we follow up on this. Now, we're still studying through that 7-year period of famine, global famine in the land of Egypt. And right now, as we sit in this story, we are nearing the midpoint of that period of famine in the land of Egypt. And Joseph has now tucked his family away in a safe and protected aspect of the land, where he then makes sure that his family, Israel, right? The descendants of Jacob, whose name is Israel. He has tucked them away in a safe spot, and Joseph is providing for and taking care of Israel, the family. Keep those facts in mind, because we have here a remarkable prophetic connection between these 7 years of famine and the 7-year tribulation period that is coming upon the earth in our very near future. Now, this doesn't apply to us. We're not going to be here during the 7 years of tribulation period, are we? At least not some of us, for sure. Hopefully, I mean, you never know how it's going to work out, but the Lord's coming back for us before the 7-year period of tribulation. So we're gone. In the story, what you're going to see take place, this won't apply to us. We will have a heavenly seat to watch those 7 years of tribulation. We're the church, so we're with the Lord on a 7-year honeymoon in heaven as his bride, while the earth is going through 7 years of tribulation. And understand that Genesis 47 and all of this story of Joseph that's covering the tribulation period is not meant for the church. It's not aimed at the church. This isn't prophecy for us. This is prophecy for the nation of Israel. This is something that the nation of Israel is going to experience, and the rest of the world. The nation of Israel, by and large, that has rejected Christ, will go through the tribulation period. We talked about it, that we believe that after about 2 years of the tribulation period, that's when, just as after two years of that 7 years of famine in Egypt, Joseph was revealed to his brothers, so Jesus will be revealed to his Jewish brothers. All right? And then from that point on, as we get to the midway point in this 7 years of famine, now that Joseph has been revealed to his brothers, now his brothers are taken care of and provided for. And it's the same with the nation of Israel. As we study through Revelation chapter 6 through 19, the tribulation period, we see the same thing. We see the Jews coming to Christ, having Christ revealed to them and coming to Christ early in the tribulation period. We believe about 2 years in or so, after nearly all of those first 7 seal judgments. And then what takes place after that as you read the book of Revelation? The same thing. You see the Lord miraculously providing and caring for the nation of Israel. And if you want to follow along with me real quick, turn to Revelation chapter 12. I just want to read to you how similar these stories match up. Revelation chapter 12, beginning at verse 14, it says this, "But the woman," now that would refer to the nation of Israel, "the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place." Now, some people believe that is picturesque and symbolic of the United States, because our symbol is the eagle, they say. That is symbolic of the United States coming to the aid of Israel and helping the nation of Israel relocate to a safe place where they will not be persecuted by the Antichrist, and where they will be provided for miraculously by the Lord. Could be, but we don't know. There's not enough information there. But we do believe that during the tribulation period, the Lord is going to take the nation of Israel. Once the persecution from the Antichrist heats up, he's going to take the nation and he's going to tuck the nation away into the rock city of Petra. We've talked about that before. I don't know if you remember that. We'll get to that and we'll cover it in depth, why I believe that, when we get to our Revelation study in, just a few months. But we believe that the nation of Israel is going to be tucked away there in the rock city of Petra. And Christians have caught on to that. Christians believe that pretty widely. And some Christians have gone to actually providing in advance Bibles and water and all sorts of things, stocking it up there in that rock city of Petra, which is right now abandoned. I'll talk about that more in a moment. But it says this concerning the place that Israel is taken to during the time of tribulation. It says, "Where she is nourished for a time and times and a half a time." That's 3.5 times. Anyone know what that means? 3.5 years. We're at the midway point in the Great Tribulation, just as in Genesis 47, we're at the midway point of that great famine in the land of Egypt. The types just totally connect. So at the midway point, that's when Joseph took his brothers and his family and tucked them safely into Goshen and then provided for them way differently than the rest of the Egyptians, the rest of the world, we might say. Same with the nation of Israel. At the 3.5 period, at the 3.5 mark, the Lord is going to move them out, get them into a safe space, and then the Lord is going to provide for them for that last 3.5 years of the tribulation period. And then it goes on to say, verse 15, "So the serpent," that would be Satan, The serpent spewed water out of his mouth like a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away by the flood. That is speaking of persecution. This is when the persecution of the Antichrist against the Jews really heats up. But verse 16, look what happens. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon had spewed out of its mouth. The earth itself, the positioning of Israel, helps Israel out in the future in the tribulation period. Now, I think there's good reason for that. If you know anything about that area of Petra, it is a very strange place. It is an entire city carved into the rock, the cliff. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful place. But the passageway to get there, to get to Petra, is so narrow in places that there's only enough room for a single horse to pass through. It's very narrow. The land itself is going to help to protect the nation of Israel in the future tribulation period, just as we're seeing this spot in Goshen is going to aid these brothers of Joseph during the last 3.5 years or so of this great famine. So it is an incredible tie-in to me. And I definitely see it. I hope you see it. Verse 13, we're going to come back to that in a bit. But verse 13, now there was no bread in all the land, for the famine was very severe, so that the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan languished because of the famine. And Joseph gathered up all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan for the grain which they bought. And Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. Okay, so the first thing that happens as the famine really kicks in now in this second part of the 7-year period, the first thing that happens is that the Egyptians begin to bring all their money in order to buy grain, food. They have to do that because nothing is growing now on the land. They're hungry. They have no way of providing their own food. So they come to Joseph, who, remember, has storehouses filled with grain, filled with food. It's just waiting to be picked up. So the people begin bringing their money, and they take their money and they buy food, right? It's a regular economic system at this point. You give money in exchange for goods. Verse 15. So when the money failed, okay, now the money's all gone. Now, that was quick. It's kind of like my bank account. So when the money failed in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, "Give us bread. For why should we die in your presence? For the money has failed. We're broke. We spent it all. We bought all the food we could afford. You got all our money, Joseph." Verse 16. Then Joseph said, "Well, give your livestock, and I will give you bread for your livestock, if the money is gone." So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gave them bread in exchange for the horses, the flocks, the cattle of the herds, and for the donkeys. Thus he fed them with bread in exchange for all their livestock that year. So verses 15 through 17, the economic system has taken a turn. Everyone was out of money, and it now becomes a bartering system. And what they have to do is take their animals, their farm animals, and they have to give those to Joseph in exchange for food. So now what's happening is this. They've lost all their money. Now they're losing their businesses. Those animals were their business. And without those animals, there was no potential to make money. There was no potential to be in this economic system. So they've lost their money now. They've lost their businesses, their animals, which means at this stage, Egypt now owns, if this doesn't sound like a government, Egypt now owns all the money and all the animals, or we would say all the businesses, right? The government owns, so far, all their money and all their businesses. But, as Billy Mays used to say, but wait, there's more. It gets worse. Verse 18. When that year had ended, they came to him the next year and said to him, "We will not hide from my lord that our money is gone. My lord also has our herds of livestock. There is nothing left in the sight of my Lord but our bodies and our lands. Why should we die before your eyes, both we and our land? Buy us, strange request, buy us and our land for bread, and we and our land will be servants of Pharaoh. Give us seed that we may live and not die, that the land may not be desolate. Then Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh. For every man of the Egyptians sold his field because the famine was severe upon them. So the land became Pharaoh's. And as for the people, he moved them into cities from one end of the borders of Egypt to the other end. So hey, in order to get grain, they were down to their last straw. All they had left were their own bodies and the property they owned, their land. And Joseph says, well, that'll do. We'll buy that. We'll take that too. We'll trade you some food. We'll keep you eating. And your land will now become the property of Pharaoh. The government will now own your land too. Well, and as a matter of fact, you'll be servants to the Egyptian government. Pharaoh owns you as well. That is what you would call socialism and communism. This is about as bad as you can get. And hey, as we reach this point, we now find out for sure what political party that Joseph was affiliated with. It's official. He's a Democrat. The government owns all of the money. The government owns all of the businesses, all of the animals. The government owns all of the land. The government owns the people themselves. That's about as bad as things could get for the people. What we have here is a mass government buyout. And it's great for Joseph and Pharaoh, isn't it? I mean, that works. That's how communism works. You know, it's great for the people at the top. It's great for government officials. It's great for rulers. It's not so great for the people that are below that, the common people, the common folk. Just, you know, we used to be, as a country, we used to be so smart that if a politician, if a political candidate accidentally revealed his cards to us and we found out that he was socialist or communist, we would make sure he didn't get elected to any position. For some reason, we're not so smart anymore. Somewhere along the way, we lost our intelligence in the political arena, and now, you know how it is, the candidates are out there saying, hey, we think the government should completely own your health care. We think the government should own this and own that. We want government control, and then we want to sit back and let the government give to us. They'll come right out and platform on those political stances, and then somehow people will go out and vote for them. That just blows my mind. But here's a fact. Any politician that tells you, hey, give all your things, all your money, all of your life to the government, and we'll take care of you, steer clear from that politician. Because believe me, they will take care of you, but like this, you know what I mean? Man, I hope we get some intelligence back in this country when it comes to our politics. But at any rate, we know that socialism and communism is always a horrible deal for the common people. It benefits the government. And maybe you're disappointed in Joseph right now. Joseph did this. Joseph cut these deals. Joseph dealt shrewdly with these Egyptians, and they end up losing it all. But let me just say this. First of all, God was blessing Pharaoh because Pharaoh was blessing God's people. And that is a law of God. We have it in multiple places in the scriptures. Genesis 12:3, Genesis 27:29. Here's that law. Whoever blesses you, the nation of Israel, God, I will bless. Whoever curses the nation of Israel, God will curse. That's just a law. It's always consistent and it always works. So Pharaoh is just living in this blessing as he's blessing Joseph. And now Joseph's family and God has just been blessing him. And then what did we just cover? Jacob shows up and prays blessing over Pharaoh. And immediately after old man Jacob lays his hand and prays that prayer of blessing over Pharaoh, suddenly Pharaoh owns all of Egypt. And I mean all of it, even the people. That's a powerful prayer. Man, I wish I had people like that laying hands and praying for me. That's a powerful prayer. So first and foremost, God is choosing to bless Pharaoh. But even more than that, this story is going somewhere prophetically. The story is going somewhere prophetically. Maybe you don't see it yet, but let me say it like this. Examine the government right now that we see in Genesis 47. Now, keep in mind our types. Egypt is a type of the world. That's what Egypt represents in the scriptures. So what has Joseph built? Joseph has built a one world government. He has built a government where the government owns everything, and there's one guy sitting at the top of it all, controlling it all. And if you want to get anything, food or clothing, you have to go to that one guy because he runs it all. Now, does that kick your prophetic mind into gear a little bit? Because this is the very government that the Antichrist is going to set up, not just in a local spot, but all over the world during that 7 year of tribulation. It's this exact same kind of government. It is a government where the Antichrist sits on top of it all and controls everything globally. You want food, you want clothing, you have to be connected to his system, which means you have to have a mark, right? You have to have the mark of the beast. That's how this works. It's the same kind of system, but there are some differences. Under Joseph's system, at least all the people are taken care of for two reasons. Joseph is a great man. He is a great and godly man. But secondly, Joseph is well prepared. He has the supplies to take care of people. The same will not be the case with the Antichrist. His government is going to begin with an economic collapse. I mean, right after he takes power, there's an economic collapse. Number one, the Antichrist will not be a great man. He will be a horrible man, empowered, much as Jesus was empowered by the Holy Spirit. He'll be empowered from hell. And secondly, he does not have the goods. He does not have the supplies to take care of people on the earth. So big differences in the systems, yet we see a connection here to the system. Here's the great thing that comes from the one world government, though, right? This one world government in Egypt right now is an okay thing because Joseph is running it, and he's a great man. The one world government that's coming during the 7 year period is going to be a horrible thing because there's a horrible man at the top of it. But here's what I love. At the end of the 7 years of tribulation, when the world is dying under this one world government, the second return of Jesus takes place. And Jesus comes down to earth, actually steps foot on our planet again for the second time. And what does he do? He overthrows the Antichrist. He overthrows every ruler in every kingdom, from federal to local. And right there at the second coming of Christ, there is a change of power. There's a change of regimes. And that same government, this is interesting, that, at least to me, that same one world government is the government that Christ will carry into the 1,000 years of millennial reign, the kingdom age on the earth. See, the system under the Antichrist was messed up. But when Christ comes and overthrows him, he steps into that kingdom, that one world government. He's now ruling over all of it. Revelation tells us at that time that all the kingdoms of the earth become the kingdoms of our Lord and his Christ. He's ruling it all then. And guess what? Even though it's a one world government for 1,000 years on the earth, it's going to be a wonderful thing. It's going to be unparalleled peace and prosperity and joy and happiness like never before. Why? What's the difference? The king. The king. A good king makes that much of a difference. So, what an interesting connection between these two. Verse 22. Only the land of the priests he did not buy. So this was the one exception. This is the one thing that the Pharaoh, that the Egyptian government doesn't own right now. That's the priest. And it says this, for the priests had rations allotted to them by Pharaoh, and they ate their rations which Pharaoh gave them. Therefore, they did not sell their lands. In other words, this mass government buyout did not affect their religious workers because, as we see here, the religious workers were sponsored by the state. They were completely already taken care of by the Egyptian government. That wouldn't be such a bad thing for the church as long as they didn't force us with their rules. But I mean, if they just kept throwing money at us, we would take it here at Anchored. So their religious systems were completely funded by the government, so nothing changed there. Those religious lands that were set up, they stayed the same. Verse 23, then Joseph said to the people, indeed, I have bought you. I don't know, it kind of feels like rubbing salt in the wound. Indeed, I have bought you. I own you, people. And your land this day for Pharaoh. Look, here is seed for you, and you shall sow the land. You're a slave now. You're state-owned, government-owned. But, verse 24, listen to this. And it shall come to pass in the harvest. Did you catch that? It shall come to pass in the harvest. Let me read on a little bit more. No, let's stop right there. All right, it shall come to pass in the harvest. Do you see what Joseph is doing? This is the incredible thing. This is what makes him such an incredible man. Right now, he has given all of that wealth, all of everything to the Pharaoh. He's just passed it right on. All right, here's more money, Pharaoh. Here's more animals. All right, here's the people. They're your slaves. Tell me what you want them to do, and we'll have them do it. But here's what Joseph does. If you lost faith in Joseph over him setting up this one world government, if you lost faith in him, you're about to get it back. Here's what Joseph is going to do. When I almost said the tribulation period, when the famine period is over, when that 7 years of famine is over, and the land can once again be sown and harvested, what's Joseph going to do? He's going to release the people. And they go back to being an agrarian society. They go back to, they start over. They lost their stuff, but it was a fair trade. They got food. They got taken care of through one of the most difficult times the world has ever gone through. But when it's all done and the land is healthy again and the rain is falling and the crops are growing, Joseph, who has complete control over the nation, is going to give them their freedom back. And he's going to give them seed to go out and start their businesses with. He's going to give them their freedom. He's going to let them go. They won't be slaves of Pharaoh anymore. They'll be free people. They got through a tough time. And they're going to go from communism back to capitalism. Right? You see that? It says, it shall come to pass in the harvest that you shall give 1/5 to Pharaoh. All right, so Pharaoh, Egypt is going to be providing them with seed, with grain to get their harvests going, to get their businesses going. And here's the downfall. Here's the downside of it. A 20% tax. Egypt gets a 20% tax. 4/5, that's 80%, shall be your own as seed for the field and for your food, for those of your households and as food for your little ones. Verse 25, so they said, you have saved our lives. I don't know. I think I'd be mad about the 20% tax thing. I think I'd be a little mad about the slavery thing. But they just say, you have saved our lives. Let us find favor in the sight of my Lord, and we will be Pharaoh's servants. They just don't bat an eyelash at being slaves. They don't bat an eyelash at that future 20%. There's not going to be any Boston Tea Party. They're okay with the coming taxes in the near future. They're okay with it all. They're just happy to have that next meal. Joseph saved them. He did. He saved them. Verse 26, and Joseph made it a law over the land of Egypt to this day, that is, as of the day of this writing, not as, this day, June 2020. that Pharaoh should have 1/5, 20% tax, except for the land of the priests only, which did not become Pharaoh's. Verse 27. So Israel dwelt in the land of Egypt, in the country of Goshen, and they had possessions there and grew and multiplied exceedingly. Back to Israel. Remember what I said. Nothing that the Egyptians just went through happened to the people of Israel. They were their own special thing. During that 7 years of famine, Joseph was completely providing for them. They didn't have to cash in their money for food. They didn't have to turn over their animals for food. They didn't have to sell their souls to the government for food. They're just completely up there on their own. They're in a different category. They're being taken care of, just like in the type with the nation of Israel during the 7 years of tribulation. And even in this famine, this disastrous famine, look what happens to the nation of Israel. They grew and multiplied exceedingly. This has and always will be the paradigm for the nation of Israel. You're going to see it as soon as we kick off the book of Exodus, Exodus chapter 1. Under cruel bondage, the nation of Israel prospers. Under severe famine, Genesis 47, the nation of Israel prospers. It is a paradigm that is forever locked in. That even in the darkest and worst of situations, God causes the nation of Israel to thrive. And of course, there's a parallel there too to the New Testament church as well. There is nothing coming prophetically that the church will be here for that the church will not prosper through. Same with the nation of Israel. But let me say that again. There is nothing coming to this world prophetically that the church will be here for that the church will not prosper its way through. Same with the nation of Israel. God favors the nation of Israel. The nation of Israel is the apple of God's eye, the center, the pupil of God's eye. The church, God favors the church. God blesses the church. Even in the toughest of situations, COVID-19 doesn't matter. Whatever we face, whatever comes, God will prosper the church. We will prosper our way through it. Because back to the nation of Israel, what God blesses, no one can curse. And it's the same with the church. God's blessing is over the church, and what God has blessed, no one can curse. Verse 28, and Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. Interesting. Joseph was sold into slavery when he was how old? 17 years old. So check that out. Joseph and Jacob were together for the first 17 years of Joseph's life. Jacob lost 22 of those years believing his son was dead. But now what does he get? He gets another 17 years to live with his son Joseph, or to be near his son Joseph. 34 years total he got to spend. So, I kind of stepped back a little bit from a previous statement. I guess 17 years is a pretty good period of time to have with your son that you've been missing for so long. But I still guarantee you, I stand by my statement. When he got to heaven, I bet he thought, man, I wish Joseph did die back then, because I'd be with him right now. I got to wait on Joseph again. Reading on, so the length of Jacob's life was 147 years. He shows up in Egypt at 130. He lives to be 147, 17 years. Verse 29, when the time drew near that Israel must die, he called his son Joseph and said to him, now if I have found favor in your sight, please put your hand under my thigh. I know that sounds weird. Please put your hand under my thigh, but we talked about that before. Do you remember the little demonstration I gave you where I sat up here on the chair and I had Maggie come up and put her hands under my thigh and talked about how that worked with an oath? Because it drew your attention. If your hands are locked under someone's thighs as they're sitting, you don't have no choice but to look at them and listen to them because you're uncomfortable. So he does the same thing here. He says, put your hand under my thigh and deal kindly and truly with me. Please do not bury me in Egypt, but let me lie with my fathers. You shall carry me out of Egypt and bury me in their burial place. And he said, I will do as you have said. Then he said, swear to me. And he swore to him. So Israel bowed himself on the head of the bed. In other words, Jacob at this point was not getting around so well. and he couldn't even get down off the bed to do a proper bow. He just kind of does a half bow there on the bed because he wasn't well. Now, Jacob realizes he's probably not going to make it out of Egypt alive. His days, which felt short to him, were numbered. He's coming up to the end of it here, and he makes Joseph to make a promise to him. He knows the nation is eventually going to get back to the promised land, even if he doesn't. He knows the nation is going back to Canaan one day. And the deal is this: when the nation heads back to Canaan, please dig up my body, pull it out of the cave, whatever you have to do, dig up my body and take my corpse with you, bury me back home. And I can think of really 3 good reasons why Jacob wanted this. Number 1, it showed his faith in God. I mean, he just absolutely believed what God said. God told him he was going to bring him back. Now, he's going to come back, in a body bag, but he is going to come back. But Jacob took that with the deeper meaning. I do believe that he understood God to mean that he was going to bring his descendants back into the promised land. So this stop in Egypt wasn't permanent, it was temporary. And this shows his faith in God's word. Yeah, we're coming back. This Egypt thing is short-lived. It's for a time, only 430 years, just a few days to Jacob. You know how he counts time. And we're coming back to the land of Canaan, I believe it, so take my body with you. Number 2, I think it showed affection for the land that God picked for him. And that's always how it works. When the Lord picks stuff for you, when the Lord calls you to stuff, you just end up loving those things. God knows how to pick the best for us. God knows how to put us where we should be. And eventually we come around and we say, oh, God, this is perfect. And our affections are there. So his affections are there for the land. And number 3, I like this one the best. Potentially, it gives the rest of the nation a good reason to leave Egypt. I don't know if this was on Jacob's thinking. This is guesswork. Could be, maybe not. But this would be a good reason to just sort of spur on the nation of Israel in the future when it is time to leave Egypt. To just remind them, hey, I want my body buried in Canaan. In other words, you need to get moving. Don't stick around in Egypt. Once it's time to go, it's time to go. You might say, I don't see it, I don't understand it, but that became the exact problem that the nation of Israel faced during Babylonian captivity. They went into Babylonian captivity in the worst of ways. Just the worst that you could possibly imagine. Between the Babylonians and the Assyrians, they took the Jews on some occasions, hooking them by the jaws with a giant hook and dragging them up north into captivity. This was a nasty thing. This was a wartime event. And that bondage was horrible for a while. But something happened over the years, because by the time we get to the Jewish release from Babylonian and Assyrian captivity, what happened? Not many people wanted to come back. They got content in Babylon. They got content in Assyria. And they had to scrape and scrounge just to come up with 50,000 people. That's a drop in the bucket to the population. They had to scrape and scrounge to get 50,000 people to come back, repopulate Jerusalem, and begin rebuilding the temple. So maybe it's part of Jacob's thinking, hey, I just got to remind him that the time is coming when we need to leave. But whatever that may be, I guess we don't know for sure. We do know this. Joseph kept his word. Joseph was a man of his word, and Joseph would eventually take his body out of there and plant him in Canaan.